This is a series where I chat with scientists and those trained in STEM fields about their lives and hobbies that took a turn outside of traditional science and STEM fields. Welcome to Science and. Hello, my name is Maisha Alexander, and I'm also known as the Rockstar Anthropologist. Welcome to another episode of Science and this is a series where I chat with scientists and others that have been trained in STEM fields about their lives, hobbies, and careers outside of traditional science and STEM fields. And I am so excited to do another episode, and I'm probably going to keep saying that until I do like 100 episodes, which would be absolutely wild because I'm only planning to do this as a limited series, but it doesn't matter. I'm having a great time so far. So let's get into it. Too much touch stifles. Even the toughest cells die wanting room to breathe. I read this and I thought this was so beautiful. And these are the beautiful and graceful words of a biomedical scientist. That is honest to God truth. Jenny Chi is the biologist poet or poet biologist who joins us today to talk about her journey as a multi-talented writer, artist, and her debut book, a collection of poetry called Focal Point. And welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Maisha. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited about this.
Oh my goodness. I am so happy that you're here. And I want to talk just a little bit about you. Jenny received her PhD in biomedical science and was studying and researching cancer. And in 2020, she actually became the winner of the 2020 Steel Toe Books Poetry Award. So while studying and researching, which is already an incredibly daunting task, it's my understanding that Jenny wrote the majority of her incredible book, Focal Point. I have a copy here. I'm also going to edit in a copy too. And so I know that many of us probably don't associate the writings of biomedical researchers with terms like poignant and emotional and rhythmic and enigmatic and evocative, but here we are deliberately using these words to describe your work. So before we start to talk about your work, I would love for you, Jenny, to briefly explain your work as a scientist.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I'll preface by saying that I graduated from my PhD program about 3 years ago now. And during grad school, I was studying a rare kind of pancreatic cancer and studying mechanisms of cell death and how to potentially target those to impact cancer cell fate. And since I graduated, I've done a couple of things. I briefly worked in health tech for a couple of years. And in the last, I guess it's been almost 4 years then. In the last couple of years, I have been working in competitive intelligence, focusing on ovarian cancer.
Wow. So you're still actively practicing, you're doing, I guess, is it still considered biology work or biomedical work?
I guess biology adjacent. I'm more on the business side of things now, so I'm no longer in the lab.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Well, congratulations as you continue to navigate your career. And I definitely do want to get to your poetry, but I thought it would be helpful for those of you who are unfamiliar with Jenny or her work, or maybe you've been following for years. I don't know, but Jenny is what I would consider a science communicator. And science communicators are people who communicate science, right? I know, Captain Obvious, but I think there's really a broad range of what people describe as science communicators, and for the reasons why people communicate science. But for the purposes, or for our purposes, I think it's helpful to mainly focus primarily on outreach in science communication. And when I say outreach, I mean public engagement. So Jenny and I met while we both were in graduate school through a program called ComSciCon. And I will give you the ComSciCon's sort of definition of what it is. It is a series of workshops focused on communication of complex and technical concepts organized by graduate students for graduate students. It's an excellent program, and I'll post the link wherever links get posted to the program. But I wanted to say all of this to really set the stage to highlight the versatility of your work, and sort of the ways that you exercise your creative muscle before you publish Focal Point. And is ComSciCon like a good place to start, or could you even go back further?
I could probably go back even a little bit further, actually, to what led me to ComSciCon, because I had been doing I guess, dabbling in like a variety of things. Like I started out doing science comics, actually, because I was really interested in like the science communication side of things. Very early in graduate school, like I knew pretty quickly that I didn't want to stay purely in academic research. And so I was doing that. I was doing a bit of science journalism, all sorts of things. And I don't know, I stumbled upon ComSciCon somehow through all of my searching, and I'm really glad I did.
It's so interesting. Depending on how you navigate the world as a human being, particularly students, are you often the people that are seeking how to do something, where some people they just go ahead and do it, right? They're like, we'll figure it out. But oftentimes scientists or students will be like, okay, well, there has to be a process, so let me go find the class that I should take to learn the process. And that's basically what happened to me and how I ended up at ComSciCon. Trying to learn the process. And also, I wanted to build my network full of other individuals that were doing this, because at the time in my graduate program, there weren't a lot of people that were interested in doing science communication as a role, or even making it a part of the types of science that they did. And I think I've always been more interested in the storytelling behind the bones, maybe more than the data itself, or even just interpreting the data in a way that didn't bore me to death. And I'm really happy that I did, and I recommend that program for any graduate students seeking to do sort of the same thing. So when you came to ComSciCon, were you already what you would consider, or what anybody would consider, like a writer? Were you publishing? Were you like, yeah?
I'm trying to remember what year that was. I was definitely already starting to publish. I don't think I had gotten to a point yet where like I was thinking of this collection of poems as a book, because I didn't necessarily have that intention in creative writing initially, because it didn't seem practical. But I was definitely writing and publishing and like starting to get my work out there. I think I had published an essay in the Atlantic like shortly before. So I was starting to try to see myself as a writer professionally.
So you use the term practical, which I think is really perfect term to sort of talk about some of the issues, or even like the limiting beliefs that scientists in particular kind of place on themselves. And some of it has to do with the expectations of your role or what you're supposed to do in science, and others of it just what we understand, right? Like what information is available to us. And I feel like this is maybe a good time to maybe talk about some of the common myths that you encountered as you started to explore more of that creative side, and if any of it affected how you thought about your work, or even how you thought about the ways that you might develop your career in the future.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Manisha, I just wrote a draft of an essay about this, actually. So what a great time to ask this question. I had such imposter syndrome throughout graduate school because I felt like I was always split between these two sides of myself. And I think, yeah, similar to you, I was always like interested more in like the storytelling side of things. Like I was writing and like reading like fiction long before I became interested in science. And that wasn't necessarily the background that a lot of my colleagues had. I think a lot of them had been really interested in science from childhood, and many of them, their parents were also professors, and so they had this background that I did not. And I think there very much is this idea in academia that like if you are not fully dedicated to your study, if that is not your life, then you're not serious enough about it. And I remember interviewing with a professor when I was trying to figure out like what lab I wanted to rotate in and join. And I won't name her, but she said that she really preferred MD PhDs because they had a very tight deadline and they were going to get their stuff done very quickly and like be focused. And she also said that she kind of had a preference for like male students because like they weren't going to have families, and she had sacrificed having a family for her career. And so I think there's very much this like old guard of scientists who had sacrificed so much and they expected that from their students.
Wow. I mean, unfortunately, your situation and that anecdote in your story and experience is very common. It's still really, really common. I watch a lot of YouTube, like a ton of it. And one of there's a couple that I really, really like right now. They go by Becky and Chris, and Chris is the husband in the group, and Chris is also a medical doctor. And in one of the episodes, which I will also link, he talks about basically how his enjoyment of just wanting to show his life outside of medicine, like basically going on trips with his wife and learning how to be a helicopter pilot and things that people do, actually cost him his job because they thought he wasn't serious enough. That all of those things were more important. It wasn't a snapshot to the individuals that were making that decision. And I that like blew my mind because I know so many people in my life that are science and or medical and, you know what I mean? Like the doctor friends that we have that are also, and by we, I mean, just in general, like the doctor friends that are also death metal guitarists, or the, I'm going to talk to you tomorrow, bioanthropologist who is also a beauty YouTuber. Like,
Oh, that's awesome.
I know, right? We're just round individuals, but I feel like it's really unfortunate that a lot of maybe individuals might not be following dreams or even just exploring their talents a little bit more because they're worried about being perceived as not serious enough. So
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
you published your book, what was the response to this?
I mean, mostly positive, I think. I feel like most people kind of feel the way we do, where like we really enjoy meeting people who are like scientists and also something else that makes people like well-rounded and interesting, which is why I really love the idea of the series. And yeah, I feel like probably more of my scientist friends have like bought my book than my writer friends because they're buying so many books all the time for their like many friends. So yeah, I think people were pretty excited. I even like emailed my PI, my graduate advisor, and like he was pretty excited about it. I don't know, it like becomes something like interesting to them.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to take some time to talk about this, and as everyone can see, I have notes. I didn't want to like mark up my copy of the book, even though you sent me like you emailed me a review copy. I was like, no, I need it. Like I have my little dots here. Um, so Jenny, when I was before I even prepared for this interview or even knew that it was going to happen, I mean, like a couple of years ago, you posted a poem, and it's actually in your book, but you posted it. It was in the Atlantic, and I will post a link to it. It was called Postcards for the Living. And I think it was probably the first poem that I read by you. I just clicked on it just to see what you were up to. And I don't know what I was expecting, but I was devastated. Like, I was emotionally open when I read that poem. I was caught completely off guard. And that's when I truly understood at that moment how incredibly special that you were, and what an incredibly gifted writer you were. And I'm trying not to get emotional because I'm like slightly reading it right now. The feelings are coming up again. But like, the themes in this book really do span a range of very human experiences, ranging from like your influences as a scientist, they're clearly in there, to the personal. And the poems really seem to reflect like love and grief and trauma, complex emotional moments. And throughout it, there were definitely points where I was reading and got caught completely off guard, ugly crying, just because like your words so masterfully really connected with like a moment or a memory in a way that put me back in that space, like full sensory recall. Um, and so I had to kind of take it slow with this because like I said, I was an emotional mess. Um, but I want to talk about so many of the themes in here, but I really want to first talk about, or really sort of start with, why this is such an emotional um, sort of piece, or a piece of work. And if you don't mind, if it's okay with you, I think it has a lot to do, and you can tell me, but your experiences with grief and in losing your mother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so my mother had a really long struggle with cancer, like all through college for me. Um, and I was just so young. I actually started college early too. I started when I was 16. And I graduated like right after turning 20, and she died in my senior year, like right before I turned 20. And then I started grad school like a few months later. And so I was just reeling from this like earth shattering grief, because my mom had always been my best friend. But of course, like I was also like growing up and I don't know, struggling with a lot of things besides her illness, even like during college, figuring out what I wanted to do, all of these standard growing up things. And so, yeah, when I started grad school, I was in this like new city. I didn't know anyone and I had no one. And it was just so isolating that like this was sort of the only outlet I had.
I want to hold on to this because I want to sort of connect that to another theme that you have in your book, that sort of resonates with. I am not a child of immigrants, and there are some themes here where you sort of touch on that experience, and in particular, the two come together when in the poem, one of the first poems in your book, "The Last Visitation," and uh, you're sort of outlining what's happening in this room, this hospital room. And there's the exchange that you're communicating between your father and you. And it's almost, and I don't know, please tell me, but in the immigrant experience, this sometimes children have to help their parents navigate these things that are very adult experiences. And
Yeah.
so in this exchange, that's sort of what I imagined, was you, little Jenny, trying to help your dad navigate this. And there's sort of like where you say, where I guess you're communicating as your father, and you say, "My father accused, you give up, she want to live, and you don't let her." Um, and I just sort of imagined him looking to you for guidance, and you looking in the moment and reading through the charts and being like, "There's nothing that I can really do," but it's just so overwhelming. And I don't know if you had to be that grown up sometimes for your parents too, where you were communicating or helping them navigate these situations. And I'm just like, I don't know, this was just such an overwhelming image that I had when I was reading this.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that is very much the experience of many children of immigrants. And I think something that was sort of like emotionally strange for me personally was that like my parents very much like wanted me to prioritize my education. They had lived through the Cultural Revolution in China. And so their own education had been interrupted because they were both children of scholars and therefore people who were targeted during that time. And so they really valued that for me. And since my mom was sick all through college, they would sort of like hold a lot back when I was at school because they didn't want me to worry. But of course, that kind of made me worry more because I didn't know what they weren't telling me.
Right.
And then but then every time I was home for breaks and stuff, it was like all of a sudden like, okay, you are the person who speaks the best English. You take her to appointments. You ask the doctors all the questions. There's a lot of emotional whiplash in that.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I still handle a lot of, I don't know, those kinds of things, like for my dad. Like, I generally like make a lot of their doctor's appointments. He remarried shortly after my mom died, and like my stepmother speaks no English at all. So like I like made all of her doctor's appointments recently. And it tends to just be easier for everybody if I like navigate that.
Yeah. All like I said, the emotional rawness is so in there. Those moments that you bring us into, those moments of open vulnerability that are just beautifully written reflections of like chaos, basically. That's what I imagine. That's what I see. And it's really raw. But then there's also some excellent sci-com happening, right? So, what one of the poems that I'm referencing is called "Telomeres" and a 2 a.m. love poem, and in it, I'm not going to give too much away because y'all need to just read this. But in it, you talk about you. There's this process of weaving the process of like chromosome activity into a beautiful moment of sort of human experience and connection and relationship building. And that's a bit of brilliant psychom explanation. And for those of you who don't know what a telomere is, it's sort of the end of the chromosome. And they like I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to explain it. If there's a shoelace, if you imagine a chromosome as a shoelace, right? And the end of that shoelace that has a little plastic bit on it, that's the telomere. And anytime that a cell replicates itself, that telomere gets shorter and shorter and shorter. It doesn't like grow or replicate in the same way. And eventually it just sort of, as it gets older, just eventually dies off. And so, am I explaining that right?
Yeah, that is an excellent explanation.
All right, awesome. I'm not a biologist, but I kind of understand a little bit about the way cells work. But you do it. You explain it in this beautiful poem that is totally a love poem. It is totally like that moment of like I said, that human connection, the experience of relationship building, that will they, won't that they moment. And at the end, you say, and how maybe we could let our telomeres shorten together. Like age together, grow together, disappear together. It was like, oh my God, that's an incredible sitcom.
Thank you so much.
So, I mean, I think that that's a really interesting point to sort of talk about the interplay of like science and creativity. It doesn't seem for you anyway that there is a difference between the two. There's just how we utilize the tools together, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of true. And I didn't always feel this way. Even when I was writing these, to be honest, I wasn't thinking of this as SciComm. And I didn't even think I like wrote that much about science at all. Like I don't know, like I was still viewing these worlds, these parts of my life as being fairly separate. And I think that is largely due to like the influences that we were talking about earlier of like people suggesting that they need to be separate. But yeah, I think when you're spending all day thinking about these things, like, of course, it's going to come into like my writing. And so, yeah, I don't know. I've always had a hard time keeping up those walls, and so I just don't anymore.
I'm happy that you don't. I'm really happy that you don't because we get to benefit from this beautiful work of art and your incredible writings. You have essays out there on the internet. For anyone that's interested in starting to read some of her work, I will place a link down or up wherever the links go. I don't know yet. I haven't edited. This is only my second interview, but wherever they go, I will place a link to Jenny's website, but it's also up here on the screen, so that you can enjoy the work and your writing and everything. But before we sort of wrap things up, I would love to know a bit more about your sort of process. So you say that you don't have these walls anymore, but I'm interested in how you decide that you're going to write. Like, what makes you? Do you sit down and you're like, okay, this is writing time, or are you inspired in the moment? Like, how do you put that together?
That is such a good question. I wish I had a very disciplined like writing time process. I read about a lot of writers who do that, and I'm not necessarily like that. Um, I feel like at least for a lot of the books or a lot of the poems in this book, especially, it was largely like I felt inspired in a moment, and then I had to like jot stuff down. Um, and there are also times like I have a practice every year for like the month of April, which is National Poetry Month. I will like force myself to write a poem every day, and I just like give myself an arbitrary like topic or constraint, like a certain number of syllables per line, just to like make things easier for myself. Um, and that is the one time in the year when like I do have this sort of like disciplined practice. But yeah, I guess it varies.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you have any particular tools that you like to use?
um, hmm. What do you mean by that?
I don't know. Like, if you're jotting something down, do you put something? Do you just use like your notes app? Do you handwrite things? Do you have a bullet journal? Um, yeah. Do you have like an app that gives you daily prompts? That would be cool. I don't know if that
Oh,
exists, but
I'm sure it does. I don't have one of those, but I'm sure it does exist now that you mentioned it. I mostly combination of like handwriting things. I always keep like a little notebook and a pen with me, and like I'll write a Google note if like nothing else is available. Um, like a quick shout out to this like tool called Midst, MIDST, that my friend Annalise Gelman, who's also a poet, made, where it tracks. So it's kind of like a word processor, but like it can replay your entire writing process. And so if you're like writing a poem and then you like put it away and then you go back to it and like make some changes, you can replay that whole process of making those changes. So you don't have to save like 5 million Word documents like I used to do.
That's pretty cool. I will definitely check that out for those individuals that are maybe, I don't know, wanting to play around with those parameters. Do you have any particular advice for the next bio poet or medical doctor poet waiting to happen?
I would say just lean into the things that you love and don't sacrifice them because other people are telling you that you should. Like, life is too short for that. So if you love poetry or if you love sculpture or whatever, like, make time to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for coming on and doing the second episode. Everybody, please get this book, Focal Point. It's incredible. Go visit Ginny's website. And thank you. I really appreciate you doing this. You are absolutely incredible.
Oh, thank you so much, Manisha. I think you're incredible. Like, making this series is really like so much creativity and work goes into this. And yeah, I really admire everything that you've done.
Thank you.